For FBLA number one, I did a project on scheduling as my non-educational activity, my non-student activity. What I really was intrigued by with scheduling is I love organization. I really love the idea of planning. But what I realized in my research and my interview was scheduling is not that much about organization. There's a lot more to it than that. I was able to interview our high school principal, Brent Town, and I also read an article from We Are Teachers and an old journal article from Educational Leadership that you can find on the ASCD website. So I got a bunch of different ideas and tips that I can use in my future as either a principal, athletic director, or whatever steps come next in my administrative educational journey. One thing I got from Brent Town was to front load everything. And then as I was researching on We Are Teachers, I was really reaffirmed in that you need to start making next year's schedule very early. Some people make it already in August of the current school year for the next school year. But the biggest thing I got was at least have it ready or feel like it's ready halfway through this current school year. That way, all the adjustments, you have an entire half a school year to make those adjustments. You should get some form of good organizational program. We use Infinite Campus for our organizational program. Infinite Campus does a lot of the heavy loading work for you. So the organizational piece that I thought I knew about is not that crucial anymore, which is great because Infinite Campus is used by schools across the country. I know in Iowa a lot of schools use it, but an eighth grader can give their middle school counselor their plan. It gets put in there. High school counselors can approve it, make sure that they're going to meet all the expected requirements, and their 4-year plan can be mapped out for them before they even finish their 8th grade year. Another thing with that front loading is to have the right people on board. Sioux Center has 2 high school counselors now, 2 middle school counselors who help with all of this. Having those people on board really takes a lot of pressure off of you as the principal. Another important note is to utilize your staff. We currently have 84 students who graduated this year, and we are bringing in our largest class ever with 125 students. So one thing that does concern Mr. Town and the high school staff as a whole is how do we make that work without hiring more? We're kind of in a hiring freeze now with a little budget crunch, so we need to have flexible teachers. This was one thing he referenced many times, and one thing the articles reference is you need to have teachers who are willing to teach more than one thing. There is legal obligations when it comes to teaching, but there's also obligations of making sure the students are well served. So we have teachers who have taught 4 or 5 sections of a subject before who are now being asked to teach 6 or 7 sections of a subject. Some of those higher level classes that usually you try to keep 10 to 15 students in are maybe going to have 15 to 20 students, or we have to get rid of those higher level classes as a whole because we have to treat those freshmen and even the sophomore class, which is pretty big, we have to treat those even more. So with a growing enrollment, you have to be flexible in knowing that changes are going to occur. You might lose some of the more fun, exploratory type classes, but the more important and mandatory classes, you need to make sure that you can have those and not overwork your teachers. Because scheduling creates a climate, it creates a culture in your school that matters. The timing of your schedule matters. If you're going to be flexible, if you're going to have a block schedule, if you're going to have a normal 45-minute, or if you're going to have an hour to hour, whatever you decide to have, you need to have it consistent. Those transitions, that consistency, that matters not only for the students, but for the teachers and for everyone in your district to have a plan and to know. Because when you prioritize your schedule, when you prioritize what you're going to do for the year, your goals as a district, as a building, you need to make sure students come first, staff comes second. You can't be egotistical in thinking that your plan comes first. It's all about the students, and then it's about the staff. And once again, the quote that I got from Mr. Town was to get the right people on board. Make sure that the people that you are working with, the people that work under you, the ones that you trust to serve your students, are the right people on board. Because the hardest part about scheduling is when you get new kids, and those people need to be able to serve those new kids as well. So when you think about your schedule, you need to know that you might think you have the perfect schedule. Infinite Campus could put out what you think looks like a great 4-year plan, but when you get new kids, or when you get ELL capacity to the max like we have at Sioux Center, or you get some new kids in special ed programs, you have to make sure you're not overwhelming the teacher, because new kids, ELL capacity, special ed capacity, and overwhelming the teacher can all really put a stress on you as a building. It can affect your climate. It can affect the culture of your district. So you need to make sure that you have a plan set in place for all of these things. Another question I wanted to learn more about was how you deal with different schedules. How do you deal with the 2-hour late starts? How do you deal with the assembly days? How do you deal with the early outs? How do you deal with your sports team made to state? All of those different things, state standardized test. in August, you need to plan for almost everything. You need to have flexible teachers who know that they might have days where they have their 7 science subjects and they only get to 4 of them. What are they going to do the next day to make that up so they don't push those 4 too far ahead and they don't leave the other 3 they missed too far behind? What can you do to make sure that teachers know throughout this 180 days of school, you are probably going to have 35 different schedules. You need to make sure that each student, each group gets well served so that you don't leave one group behind and push one too far ahead. The less changes you make, the better. You need to communicate, and be transparent with everything that you do. One big piece of advice was to have a social media account. I follow a lot of educators on social media, and Mr. Town was very adamant about make sure that you post everything. Have good secretaries. It goes right along with having the right people on board mentality. The last thing was I researched some tips and I asked Mr. Town for some tips, and there were big 4 takeaways that I had. One was ask a lot of people questions. If you are a new administrator, especially in a new district that you're not familiar with, it's one thing to be a new teacher or new administrator in a building where you were the teacher before. But if you are a new administrator in a completely new district, completely new building, you need to ask why things are the way that they are. Why did your school decide to do things this way? Don't just flip the table and completely change everything. There's a reason people do what they do in their district and it works for them. So ask why. Another tip was to always have an intervention time. Some people call it study hall. We call it flex time at the middle school. Our high school calls it warrior time. But have time where students feel comfortable and know they can go seek out a teacher for help and know that this time is set aside for them to get help from a teacher when they don't understand something. When you have that time in place, it really makes the students feel that their value is worth the teacher's time. Another important tip was to always make sure there's time for staff to have work time. Not only during the day, but also in your scheduling, in your year-long scheduling, in your professional development, make sure there's time for the staff to work. I know sometimes they don't use it well, but make sure you put that in place so you know that the staff will use it well, and they will be very grateful for it, and they will up that climate, up that school culture. And the last important tip, the last important quote was, don't forget what it's like to be a teacher. Everyone who's a principal was probably a teacher first, and we know what it was like to work for a good administrator, a bad administrator, and we want to be that administrator that teachers respect and that teachers are willing to work for. So don't forget what it's like to be a teacher. So once again, front load, utilize your staff, plan ahead on staffing. Your scheduling creates a climate, a culture that is worth being in. Prioritize. What are some of the hardest things about scheduling you need to work through early? How to deal with different schedules, and of course those 4 tips I laid out at the end are all part of what makes scheduling an important part of being a good principal.